The Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce is pleased to present this recording of an excise tax forum that took place in Bangor on September 23, 2009. The forum consists of 4 panelists, 2 for and 2 against the excise tax question that will appear on the November ballot. The Chamber's goal is to provide open forums to present both sides of issues to fully inform the public on referendum questions. Now let's turn to John Diamond, Chair of the Board of the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for this program.
Today's event is one of several that the Bangor Region Chamber will be hosting or supporting over the next few weeks. We have this event on the excise tax ballot question. On October 7th, we'll be having a luncheon that will deal with the issue of the Tabor proposal. That will have a similar panel to this one, and we hope it, like this one, will be recorded for later broadcast on the Time Warner cable channels around the state, as well as some of the other cable channels. So we hope you'll be able to participate in that, or at least attend that event. In addition, we have several communities in the region who will be holding their municipal elections on November 3rd, and they will be hosting candidate nights. We're going to do everything we can to get word out to our members about the candidate nights so that our members are there not only to learn about the candidates and to learn about the issues, but also to better prepare themselves to be strong advocates for the issues of interest to the Bangor region business community and to help promote the quality of life in this region. So you'll be getting email messages from the Chamber on that. I hope that you'll all be able to read them and attend the events. Today, our panel is going to be moderated by Wayne Harvey. Most anybody who is in the Bangor media market knows Wayne. He gets up very early to be the morning anchor of WABI's Channel 5 News. Wayne is from northern Penobscot County, the town of Patten. A lot of people think that Patten is part of southern Aroostook, but no, it is part of Penobscot County, and we will never let it go. Very pleased that he is willing to moderate our panel. So with that, I will turn it over to Wayne Harvey. Thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. A little note first. This is my first one of these that I've done. I appreciate you guys having me here. This is kind of exciting. I love politics and enjoy it. And a sports background, I love the sports aspect of politics where there's always 2 sides and there's going to be a winner or there's going to be a loser, and normally someone's going to cry. But we have 4 people here today to kind of help us out. They're really the stars of all of this, and they're sitting here in order. I'll kind of introduce them that way. First here on my right is Jeff Herman, who has worked with the Maine Municipal Association since 1988, been the Director of Government Relations since 97. Jeff has also served on many boards in the town of Mount Vernon, where he lives with his family, been a selectman and member of the Budget Committee, currently serves on the Planning Board as well as the Board of Assessment Review. Jeff Herman. In the next seat to his right is Chris Cinquemani. Hopefully I said that right, Chris. He is the chairman of the Yes on 2 More Green Now campaign. He's the Public Affairs Director for Maine Leads, which is an Augusta-based, nonpartisan, not-for-profit citizen group committed to advancing responsible spending, lower taxes, and government transparency in Maine. Previously served as state director of the No More Than 4 campaign to preserve Maine's term limit law and communications director for the 2006 Maine Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Chris Cinquemani. In the next seat is Margaret Peggy Daigle, who has been the city manager of Old Town since 2004. Prior to that, she was the town or city manager of the communities of Patten, nice town, and Enfield, her hometown of East Millinocket, and Holton as well. She was president of the Maine Municipal Association in '99, served on the Bangor Regional Development Alliance, Bangor Target Area Development Corporation, and on a variety of local boards. That's Peggy Daigle. And the final seat on my far right hand, your far left, is Taryn Bragdon, the Chief Executive Officer of the Maine Heritage Policy Center. Prior to becoming CEO in January '08, Taryn served 5 years as the Center's Director for Health Reform Initiatives. During '01 and '02, he served as Special Assistant to the President of the Maine Senate, Senator Richard Bennett. In this capacity, he provided policy research, analysis, and advance on a variety of policy areas focusing on healthcare and tax policy as Taryn Bragdon. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a number of questions for the panel. They're going to get 3 minutes each, 90-second rebuttal for each one of them if they want to talk about any points that have been brought up. Then we'll move on to the next question, 3 minutes and a 90-second rebuttal for each. The third question, they just have their 3-minute response and answer. That's it, there'll be no rebuttal. After that, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Because we're taping this, I'm going to give them the microphone so we have good audio for them. I'm going to try to be as loud as possible. If you can't hear me, throw something. That's fine. We understand. But on to the debates. Question reads like this. For November 3rd, question 2 on your ballot. Do you want to cut the rate of municipal excise tax by an average of 55% on motor vehicles less than 6 years old and exempt hybrid and other alternative energy and highly fuel-efficient motor vehicles from sales tax and 3 years of excise tax? So our first question, and we'll go right down the panel as we've introduced them. Jeff Herman will be first. The first question, each of you has a particular perspective and interest on the outcome of this question. Could Jeff, and then down the line, please explain your position on this question and the impact of its passage on the Maine people?
Thank you very much, everybody, for having us at this forum. This is a very vibrant chamber. I've never been to a meeting quite as vibrant as this one, so it's great, and appreciate the opportunity. Work for the Maine Municipal Association. We're an association that represents the interests of municipal government in Maine. We have 2 policy committees that form their positions on initiatives. A legislative policy committee, which is a 70-member committee, 2 municipal officials from each Senate district, and an executive committee of 12 members, all of whom are elected by the select boards and town and city councils throughout the state. And both of those policy committees voted very strongly to oppose both the Excise Tax Initiative Question 2 and the Tabor Initiative Question 4. The Excise Tax Initiative is, unlike Tabor, a very simple initiative with respect to how you can compute the impacts. The financial impacts are very clear, very calculable, and they are, in fact, a 40% reduction in municipal excise tax revenue to every town and city in the state of Maine. That's local revenue that's collected at the local level and used by local governments to plow roads in the winter and repair and maintain roads and bridges in the summer. On a statewide level, municipalities take $205 million in excise tax revenue and put it into local roads. This initiative would reduce that by 40%, which is $84 million. It's a very large sum of money which would be taken out of the municipal revenue stream and become unavailable for the purposes of plowing and repairing and maintaining Maine's local roads and bridges. Towns and cities in Maine maintain and repair and plow 14,000 miles of local roads, 850 bridges, and they further plow 4,000 miles of state roads, state aid roads. So there's a very significant task of transportation infrastructure and transportation repair that falls on municipalities as a matter of state law. And we need money and revenue in order to do that. The reduction of this revenue, this 40% reduction or $84 million reduction, really has only 2 consequences. And it's going to be up to the voters in each municipality to decide which way to go. Either a further reduction in the quality and of Maine's local roads and bridges, or increased real estate property taxes to make up that lost revenue, and in all likelihood, some combination of both of those bad alternatives will be the ultimate result.
Thank you guys for holding this forum. This is a great event, lots of different perspectives here in the room. As Wayne mentioned, I am the chairman of the Yes on 2 More Green Now campaign to reduce Maine's auto excise taxes. The excise tax in Maine is probably one of the most hated taxes in the state. You can walk up and down any main street and ask any Mainer and they'll probably tell you that. And there's a reason for that. Maine's excise tax is the 7th highest excise tax in the nation, and 22 other states have no excise tax at all. That's why we brought this initiative forward, and that's why we have a simple message. Vote yes, pay less. Reducing the vehicle excise tax by approximately half will create $80 million in tax relief for Maine families. That translates to an average savings for a Maine family of about $800 over the first 5 years you own your vehicle. This tax is a regressive tax. It's particularly burdensome on Maine's low and fixed income residents. As the Maine Center for Economic Policy noted in their January 09 report, this is, as I said, a regressive tax because these low and fixed income Mainers are struggling as it is to make ends meet. They're struggling to raise their families, they're struggling to put food on the table, and they're struggling to save to retire in comfort and dignity. Reducing Maine's vehicle excise tax will improve the financial security of Mainers across the state. We need to provide this relief for Maine families, particularly now more than ever. Mainers across the state are having to do more with a whole lot less. They're having to tighten their belts, and providing excise tax relief for those Mainers will be a much-needed boost to their family budgets. But I also look forward to seeing Question 2 pass because of what it'll do to help Maine's struggling auto industry. Simple economics here, we're all business-minded folks in the room. When something costs less, people will buy more of it. If you reduce the cost of purchasing a car, we will see auto sales increase. And we have examples of that from all over the world. You know, when China reduced their car taxes, they saw a 25% increase in auto sales. And similar results in India, when they reduced their car taxes, 12.2% increase in sales. And even right here in America, we can see from the Cash for Clunkers program, while it may not have been the best managed program, we do see that reducing the cost of purchasing a vehicle increases car sales. In fact, the Federal Department of Transportation notes that the Cash for Clunkers program actually led to a 700,000 vehicle increase in auto sales. We have an opportunity to not only put money back in Mainers' pockets, but to boost Maine's struggling auto industry and put out-of-work Mainers back into jobs across the state and dealerships across the state. Again, Question 2, vote yes, pay less. This is a question that will make a difference, and I'm happy to be here and continue on with this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. From the city standpoint, we're faced with what Jeff had said. Can you all hear me? Because I don't. Okay, good. We're faced with either cutting taxes or and cutting services, or we're faced with increasing the taxes. I'm sorry. When we provide property tax relief for people that own property in the city, we try to provide it on an equal basis to everybody. We see this, or at least I see this bill, as only giving the benefit to a few individuals. And if the city is going to incur a $500,000 loss in revenue, then we're looking at about $1 million increase or more for the city of Old Town. And this is a city that has seen huge dislocation in terms of its economic status. We lost about $100 million in property value back in 2006, and we cut our budget $1.2 million. And that's huge in terms of dollars for a community. We work with the schools and we work with the city staff and departments to try to figure out what do we eliminate, what do we cut down on. The last 2 years, we've had a steady mill rate. We did a revaluation, and the mill rate went from $24.90 down to $16.20 or so. It's now at $17.40, I believe. And for 2 years, it's been at $17.40. However, the people in the city have seen an increase to their taxes because their properties have increased in the value. So we're still dealing with the unrest. So I certainly understand Chris's point about people not liking taxes. I pay taxes too, and I don't like it. However, if what we're going to do is give a benefit, we need to give that benefit to everybody, and not just a few select individuals that can afford a new vehicle. The city of Old Town has 74 miles of road to maintain, along with 20,000 linear feet of stormwater lines, 467 stormwater catch basins. And under state statute and federal rules, under the MS4, which is the stormwater rules, we have to maintain these. And the rules that are coming down from EPA is going to get more and more and more in terms of stormwater and stormwater management. And it's all related to roads and the impervious surfaces. If what we do is see a reduction in services, we're going to be looking hard at those impervious surfaces and what we do to maintain those and keep them up. The current public works budget in Old Town is $1,550,250. We maintain a fleet of vehicles and equipment that's valued at $2.3 million approximately. And we fund the depreciation so that it's flat funded, so that the taxpayers don't see a huge jump when we buy a new vehicle. It's all about $145,000 a year we put into retirement of vehicles. The services that we provide for Public Works is roads, which is summer and winter maintenance, your plowing, your pothole maintenance, your sweeping. We also do road and sidewalk reconstruction and repairs, the right-of-way maintenance, brush mowing, signage, culverts, street sweeping, leaf cleanup, spring cleanup, stormwater management. We have 5 cemeteries, 7 parks, 15 city buildings, and we also have an indoor swimming pool that we maintain. So from the aspect of the city of Old Town, we will be looking, and we currently are looking at, through our budget, total restructure of the city, because we have several people that are about to retire. And this opportunity to explain some of this to the city council and the citizens is we're looking at what services are we providing, what services can we do away with in order to maintain a low mill rate and keep the services going. And that's what you're faced with this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. It's great to be back in the Twin Cities. I grew up in Bangor. I had the opportunity to serve the people of Bangor for 4 years in the Maine legislature in the late 1990s, and it's great to be back in the area and see many friendly faces. For me, question 2 is about one thing: providing Mainers with the long-promised local tax relief. The legislature has sent hundreds of millions of dollars more to local governments with the promise that some of that money would trickle down to the local property taxpayer, but it hasn't. The auto excise tax, as Chris mentioned, is in Maine the 7th highest auto excise tax in the country. 43 other states pay a lower rate of auto excise tax. In fact, 22 states don't tax cars with an excise tax at all. Question 2 keeps the promise of tax relief for Maine families and would make it more affordable for Mainers to buy newer, cleaner, greener cars. As Chris mentioned, and as you can see on the card on your table, on the back side you can see what this tax relief would mean for Maine families buying some of the most popular cars purchased in Maine. It's real money, $800 on average on the first 5 years of ownership. This auto excise tax definitely needs to be cut, not only because it's high, but in a rural state like Maine, this punitive tax hurts Maine's families even more than if we were in a state where we all didn't travel so much. Just to remind you of how much extra money local governments have received and still how much their property taxes have gone up, let me remind you of a little bit of history here in Maine. Back in June 2004, the Maine Municipal Association and others spent $1.5 million to run a campaign that said if the state sent hundreds of millions of dollars more to local governments, then your property taxes would be cut by 15%. Well, the state lived up to its promise, and many of the legislators here in the room were part of that. Over 4 years, the state sent an additional $278 million, a 25% increase, to local governments in 4 years. Well, what happened on the property tax side? Property taxes still climbed 22%, faster, almost twice as fast as inflation, and faster than our income. That state aid to local governments didn't fund property tax relief, it just funded a spending spree. In fact, if local government spending had been at the rate of inflation, today your property taxes would be $178 million lower. If that increased state aid had simply been passed on to the local property taxpayer as it would promise. Question 2 would provide $80 million in tax relief to Maine families who have seen since the start of this decade their property tax skyrocket 58%. 58%. Again, question 2, vote yes, pay less. Give yourself the long-promised tax relief.
Now we've got a chance for a 90-second rebuttal from everyone. We'll start back here where we started before with Jeff.
Thank you very much. I wanted to point out, we have a packet of information on that table over there, this yellow thing. And if you take it when you go out, I'd appreciate it. Read it over. It has our PowerPoint and a bunch of information on this proposal in there. and I think you might find it helpful. I want to point out a few ironies with regard to the arguments of the proponents of this initiative that have come to light in their presentations. One, that the motor vehicle excise tax is the most hated tax. I don't know how you measure hatred, and I don't know whether you want to build public policy on the basis of hatred. I would think that studies and surveys show that the most tax sensitivity, as it's called, is with regard to the real estate property tax and not the motor vehicle excise tax. Secondly, that the motor vehicle excise tax is regressive is flatly wrong. The motor vehicle excise tax, as established in 1929, is a highly progressive tax system with regard to this tax rate, assuming a correlation between the ability to buy a new car and the ability to pay a relatively higher mill rate on the excise tax associated with that new car. It's a very steep, progressive rate structure, which our forefathers and their forefathers developed over 80 years ago. The third irony is that this initiative is out there to help the low-income people of this state. This initiative doesn't do anything for the low-income people of the state, assuming that they're unable to buy new cars, except make their roads worse and their property taxes higher. But I'm not buying this correlation between low-income people and the benefits of this proposal, the way it's structured. And finally, and this takes more time than I'm allowed, but there's an irony with regard, especially in this forum, with Steve Faust here and Eddie Barrett here and Clint Duchesne here and these municipal people here, that the property tax relief that was provided to these communities in this region associated with increased spending for education was not used for property tax relief purposes. Brewer and Bangor are poster child for accounting for that increased property tax education funding and getting it back to their property taxpayers. That's my time. More later.
I always find it amusing to hear that the excise tax is over 80 years old. I don't personally get a sense of nostalgia when I have to go to the town office and pay my excise tax. And I also find it amusing that some of the opponents up here are using the reason of maintaining a city pool to prevent tax relief. The fact is, question 2 is an opportunity to create that tax relief. And the doom and gloom arguments by many of the opponents out there are meant to scare voters into opposing real tax relief for their families. Question 2, again, vote yes, pay less. We have an opportunity to put more money back in our pockets, and the doom and gloom arguments of cutting services and raising property taxes and the class warfare arguments that are being incorporated into this campaign are simply wrong. Mainers are paying too much in excise taxes, and question 2 is a chance to solve that problem, reduce their excise taxes, and improve their financial futures.
Wow, I wasn't going to say anything. I can tell you that the LD1 is the legislation that the city lives under, and we have to comply with it. The city of Old Town and many of the communities definitely have been turning back to the citizens that tax dollar, that tax savings, as Jeff has mentioned. My concern is that this is not equal to all. Whether or not you're low income or high income, it's based on if you get an older vehicle, you're not going to get anything out of this. And whether the city pool is saved or not is an issue that's locally looked at on a wider issue, not part of this excise tax. It just happens to be one of the things that we have. We're looking at curbside pickup of service of garbage, recyclables. I don't have kids in the school. I live in Old Town during the week, and I live in East Millinocket on the weekend. Curbside pickup is a service near and dear to my heart. I can put it out and it disappears and I don't have to think about it. So it's quality of life issues and the things that most people are going to be looking at in terms of what they can do in their lives. So it's not so much about looking at a particular piece of infrastructure that the city has. Every town has these particular components, and they're all going to be looking at that.
Thank you. I think there's a few important points. First of all, I don't think that the Maine Municipal Association has credibility saying that this question is wrong because it doesn't cut all auto excise tax rates. I'm not aware of one effort that they have undertaken in the last 80 years to reduce Maine's auto excise taxes. Question 2 is the first step to lower Maine's auto excise taxes. And if Jeff wants to sponsor another initiative that would cut auto excise taxes for cars that are more than 6 years, I'd be happy to jump on board. But I think that we need to take incremental progress and reduce Maine's high auto excise tax. The other thing that's important to remember is the auto excise tax is the only tax solely paid by Maine residents. If you buy into this argument that it's used to fund local roads, then the question is, there are a lot more people driving on local roads who aren't Maine residents. Why don't we look at some kind of funding that reflects the cost of local roads on everybody who's driving on them, whether it's the tens of millions of tourists who come into the state, out-of-staters who own property in Maine, or others. It shouldn't be all on the backs of Maine residents. 7th highest rate in the country, we can lower it.
We'll start now. Question 3, again, another 3 minutes, and then a 90-second rebuttal. We touched on it a little bit, but let's touch on the municipal budget and operations. If question 2 passes, what do you see as the appropriate or necessary steps for municipalities to take in order to offset a net loss of revenue?
Well, I think, I appreciate the question. I think the important thing to look at is how can we have some balance between what's going on in government, in the public sector, and what's going on in the private sector. Today in Maine, there are 13,000 fewer people working in the private sector than we had 9 years ago. But in the public sector, state and local government jobs are up 3,400. We've seen spending at the local level grow at twice the rate of inflation. Property taxes up during that same period, 58%. To me, this is about priorities. Towns and local governments need to look to see what kind of efficiencies they can find. And after question 4 passes, if they do want to pass along all these costs onto the property taxpayer, at least property taxpayers will have an opportunity to vote on this. I think that it's very important that we have some balance between what's going on in the private sector, where people are losing their jobs and facing significant pay cuts, and some balance with the public sector, which seems to get as much money as they did last year and then a little bit more, and are never forced to look at efficiencies and savings. I don't think that we can spend our way to prosperity. I think we need to look at how do we have an affordable balance between our high taxes in Maine, and in particular, this high tax that only affects Maine residents.
Thank you. This is a community by community basis that everybody's going to have to look at this. Do you increase the property tax rate to the tune of what you've lost, which for us is over $1 million in Old Town, which is about $475,000 is a mill for the city of Old Town. Our loss is over $500,000. So, or do you eliminate services? You have to go through this whole process, which we're undertaking, we've been doing for the last 3 months, to look at the services. It's a huge, huge step to take, and from the time that it's voted in to the time that it's enacted will be a struggle for some of these towns. The city demographics in Old Town in 2006, according to the census, is we have about 8,100 people in the city. 364 are under 5 years old, 1,032 are school age between 5 and 17 years old, and 6,700 plus are 18 years or older. That tells me that that segment of the sector, the population, needs to be serviced. And some of the things that they like to have are roads. They like to have them swept. They like to have the sand put down, the salt put down. They like to be able to be safe. They like to have sidewalks. There's particular quality of life requirements that this sector is going to demand in order to like living in the community that they live in. And so we have to balance that with the needs of the smaller population. A lot of things that the cities and towns have to deal with are mandated services. Some things mandated through state law that we can't do without. We have to have certain things. Unless we want to deorganize and become an unorganized community, we have to have certain services, and we have to provide that. So, for instance, I just lost my finance director to public sector, which is pretty interesting. Came yesterday, and they're paying him $30,000 more than I'm paying him. And it's, when you talk about lost industries and the downturn in the private sector, he's going back to Old Town Fuel and Fiber is what he's doing. And so that industry has an upswing, and that pendulum is starting to swing that way. So there's a bit of a drift, and we have this struggle between keeping people intact and employed as well in the city, and not having to lose it. So if any of you know of a good finance director.
I think we're asking the wrong question here. Why are opponents more concerned about how government will get to continue spending our money and not more concerned about how they can find efficiencies to create the tax relief that Maine families need? I guess I have my own question here. How much is enough? 1 out of every $7 we earn is taken away from us by state and local government in the form of taxes. How much more does government want? We are one of the highest tax states in the nation. As we said, the excise tax is the 7th highest in the nation. Maine families cannot afford to keep paying government so they can continue their spending binges. We must pass tax relief. Question 2 is our opportunity to have Maine families pay less to experience that tax relief and to build on their financial future. I guess that's it. How much is enough? Vote yes, pay less. How much is enough? How much more do they demand from us? We need tax relief. We can't afford the status quo. Opponents who are eagerly embracing the status quo have expressed an unwillingness to create the tax relief we know will make a difference for families and businesses across the state. And I guess I have one question of my own here for the crowd. How many of you have seen your household budgets increase in the last year or so? 1, 2, 3 out of about 70? Okay. Just think about that for a couple of minutes while we listen to opponents of question 2 demand more and more of our money to keep funding government spending.
There seems to be an interest in demonizing municipal officials among the proponents of this initiative. It's kind of hard to be on the downslope of this process and not get into quick rebuttal, but I'll try to stay out of that until the rebuttal time. I think Peggy has it exactly right. This is a pretty stark decision-making process that's facing local government. Either you're going to be reducing your public works budget to the tune of your losses, or you are going to be increasing your property taxes to the tune of those losses, or some combination of both. Maine is a rich state with regard to voter access to local government decisions. In 450 municipalities in Maine, the voters make those decisions directly in the town meeting process. In the other 50 or so municipalities, that decision is made by a council for which there is a great deal of access from the voters. So those decisions will ultimately be made by the voters. My suspicion, my prediction is that in the early stages of implementation, there will be very sharp reductions in the road budgets in some of the larger cities that, as Peggy was pointing out, that creeps into stormwater and traffic control systems and other public works areas. In my town, Mount Vernon, is purely the road budget. Our contract to the private sector road plower who does our road plowing calls for him to get out on the road when there's 2 inches of snow. We can amend that contract and make it to get out of the road when there are 4 inches of snow or 6 inches of snow. We can change the contract to adjust to the revenue that we have available to do the work. I don't hear a big clamor about how municipalities are spending profligate amounts of money on the repair and maintenance of the roads in this state at all. I don't hear that one little bit. So I think that's the decision-making process. There's a great deal of this $205 million in excise tax revenue that goes to the private sector. In my town, most of it goes to the private sector. Maybe that's why Pike Industries is opposed to this proposal. Maybe that's why the Associated General Contractors are opposed, the Associated Business Contract Association, whatever it is. They're opposed to this initiative because of the amount of private sector work that's done with regard to local road maintenance and repair in the state.
And now we'll have a 90-second rebuttal for each of the panelists here again. We'll start again with the chair on the far end.
Sure. Well, I would expect that Pike Industries is probably opposed to this initiative because over the last 3 years, they've received $81 million in state contracts. And you can see how state government money is spent on a website that we maintain called Maine Open Gov. So I think that they have a vested interest in this high auto excise tax relief. I don't think that that's particularly surprising that they want to keep the rates high to maintain those $80 million in contracts. The important thing here to look at is we have an opportunity to provide auto excise tax relief. I don't know how it is in your family, but for my wife and I, we own 2 cars. We buy a newer car and we drive it into the ground. And we buy a newer car and then we drive it into the ground. And so when Jeff talks about that this initiative only helps a certain portion of people, he's right. It helps all of us when we buy a newer car. But because we're in a low-income state, we don't do that every year. But when you do it, as we hope to do as a family in a couple of years, then it will provide auto excise tax relief.
Thanks. I find it interesting on how much is enough in that whole discussion, because nobody likes taxes, and that's why this is such an interesting discussion. Let me tell you a couple stories. When we made some cuts back in 2006, we cut out one person out of Public Works. We cut out a lot of people, but this is one particular instance. One individual who did sidewalk plowing, he did other things, he did some mowing and a few other things. We eliminated plowing all the sidewalks in the city of Old Town as something we didn't necessarily need. We did the downtown, we did certain thoroughfares. The first snowstorm we had so many calls we couldn't keep up with them on why isn't this sidewalk plowed. And there's a huge disconnect between the vote or the decision to make a cut and the effect of what that cut means. We also had built, a year later, a budget on some leased parking and increased leased parking. Boy, this isn't working real good. And so we built a budget, the council approved it, it went through the whole process. A month later, we brought the leased parking fees to the council to approve. They didn't approve them. So we're back at a deficit. We knew we were going to have a deficit revenue. And then this particular year, we had an individual that lives out on the lake, came to the council, and he thanked us for not raising our taxes, which was nice. We had a 1740 mill rate last year, we get a 1740 mill rate this year. And he thanked us. He said, people can't afford to stay on the lake, they're selling the camps, they can't afford the taxes. The next sentence that he asked the council was, you're fixing my road, but you're not doing it well enough. Can you borrow $3 million to fix this road? So there's a huge disconnect, and I think that it's important to know that those of us in the municipal government has to deal with the reality of it.
I'm not an elected official. I don't pretend to be one, but let me just tell you briefly about what I did with my own personal budget during these challenging times. I started clipping coupons. I switched to some generics. I canceled movie night. I didn't stop eating. I didn't stop driving to work. It's about priorities. And I understand the difficult job that municipal officials will have when they have to find efficiencies to create this tax relief, but that's what they're elected for. They're elected to represent the members of their community based on the demands of that community. And the people of Maine are demanding excise tax relief. We collected over 63,000 signatures to put this petition on the ballot. 63,000 Mainers signed the petition to create lower excise tax relief in Maine. And a poll in late May found that 67% of Maine voters support question 2. They support lower excise taxes. This is not an issue of how can government keep spending our money. This is an issue of how government can change its behavior so that the people of Maine can enjoy tax relief. Now more than ever, Mainers need tax relief. Question 2 is our opportunity.
Just a couple of points in final rebuttal. I want to slip back to the private sector, public sector issue again. One of the claims that has been made by the proponents is that public sector growth is high, private sector growth is stagnant. That's a bad thing, and I don't know, somehow this thing addresses it. The $80 million, $84 million that's cut, that would be cut if this were adopted by the voters on November 3rd. A lot of that goes to the private sector. So either private sectors are good things, as the proponents, sort of the basis of the proponents' whole foundation, really, and that the private sector is a good thing. Municipalities believe the private sector is a good thing, and they engage the private sector, particularly with this revenue. The other issue is how much is enough, and that argument, 2 points. One, municipalities are already experiencing naturally the same types of reductions that their constituents are experiencing. There is less excise tax revenue coming into the municipalities because of the economy. There's less revenue sharing coming into the municipalities because of the economy and because of acts of the legislature. There is significantly less education funding coming into the municipalities, particularly in the outgoing years. FY11 looks like a train wreck ready to happen with regard to general purpose aid and school funding. So municipalities are already absorbing that, and they're just doing that. And there are cuts, and there are reductions in services, and there are layoffs. This would be on top of that. This is an addition to what's being experienced on the local level. And I probably don't have any more time.
That's it. You keep it right there. All right, so the final question that we have for the panel is this one here. And again, they'll get 3 minutes. There'll be no rebuttal time on this one. Setting aside the argument about the impact on municipalities, let's talk about the practical effects of this legislation, pro and con, on the individual vehicle owner. According to the legislation, certain vehicle owners would directly benefit from legislation, while other types of vehicle owners would not. Share your opinion on why this is or is not a desirable aspect of this proposal.
I gotta find out what I'm doing wrong with John.
Don't hold the bottom of the microphone.
Don't hold the bottom of the microphone. What was the question? Oh yeah, the question is, let's assume for a second that we do want to cut the motor vehicle excise tax. If you were going to do that, if you thought this was a good tax to cut, let's take money out of municipalities' pockets for local roads, and let's do that. Would this be the way to do it? It's an issue technically of tax incidence. How do you provide the benefit, the tax benefit associated with this? This proposal does it from our perspective in an inappropriate way from a public policy perspective. If you are if you own one of the 70% of main cars that are on the road that are 6 years old or older, you get zero benefit out of that. I believe there's a correlation between that ownership and the capacity to pay, i.e. that's a low-income population that sees no benefits, only the downside of this proposal to the low-income world. The recipients, the largest recipients of this tax benefit are two classes of people. People who can afford to buy new cars and people who can afford to buy hybrids and alternative vehicle cars and so forth. In our PowerPoint that's in our packet, we set up side by side the Cadillac Escalade Hybrid, which a tiny amount of electric power moves that drivetrain on a very occasional basis. That's an 8,000-pound vehicle that costs $80,000 in the store. And that gets an excise tax exemption for 3 years and a total sales tax exemption. In the next lot over in the Ford lot, that Ford Focus gets no excise tax exemption and no sales tax exemption because it only gets 27 miles per gallon and it doesn't have an electric motor that pumps that drivetrain. That's a sort of an absurd result from the distribution of the benefits, if you believe there are benefits associated with the program.
Let's get one thing straight. People in Maine aren't going out and buying hybrid Escalades. They're looking for responsible, affordable cars, and they want those cars to be more affordable, and that's what question 2 will accomplish. Now, opponents want to have it both ways, and I want to know which is it. Will this excise tax cut be detrimental to Maine towns, or does this excise tax cut not go far enough? Which one is it? Should local governments be getting more excise tax, or should we be cutting the excise tax even more to extend those benefits to a greater amount of people? We chose to focus on the first 5 years of the auto excise tax because it is the most damaging to Maine families' budgets. As Taryn said, if opponents would like after November to work with us to extend those excise tax cuts even further, we're happy to join them. We're happy to work with the legislature and opponents to extend those cuts even further. Another question I have, can anybody here name me a car that lasts forever? No hands. If there were cars that lasted forever, perhaps the opponents' arguments would be able to hold a little more water, but the fact remains, people have to upgrade to newer cars. The excise tax cut, question 2, will allow them to do so in a much more affordable way. It will allow them to put a newer, cleaner, safer car within reach for more Maine families. Thank you.
Thank you. From the city standpoint, those people, we believe that those people that need the tax relief, and I know this isn't working for some reason, hold it up closer, those people that need the tax relief or get into that classification as Chris talked about are not going to see any benefit to this. In the city, when this gets passed, if this gets passed, we're going to have to deal with that person that comes to the counter and is registering his vehicle, and he says, how come I don't get a break? And we're going to have to explain to them. And we're actually probably going to do up cards that we hand out to them so they can take it and understand that they're not going to get a benefit there. We're always explaining the changes in the laws, the impacts to the people, how that affects them, or why it doesn't benefit them. And that's the big issue. Equal to all. If you're going to do away with excise tax, do away with excise tax. That's 3 mils to the city, whole town. But it's important to understand that everybody has a right to be able to have opportunity to save some money, not just a few select individuals or a few select property owners, because it causes me.
I just want to remind you of what this means to Maine families. This card has on the back the most popular cars purchased in Maine last year. These are the actual tax savings over the first 5 years of ownership. I drive a 98 Honda Accord. My auto excise tax bill to register it every year is about $100. When we targeted this initiative, we thought, paying 4 mils on a car seems like a reasonable amount. Having somebody pay 6 times that amount for the first year that they put their car on the road seems wrong. I'm not driving my car any less than that person who's purchased a newer car. And again, what do we do as Mainers? We buy newer cars, we drive them into the ground. And then we buy newer cars, and then we drive them into the ground. These are real savings. For an average Maine family, this means the equivalent of 3 car payments. 3 months of car payments. That's how much you'll save on a newer car. That's real money. To local governments collectively, it means about 2% of all local spending. This is an opportunity to provide real auto excise tax relief. Folks have been waiting 80 years for it. Now's the opportunity. The legislature hasn't done anything. Local governments haven't initiated any efforts to lower this auto excise tax. Here's your opportunity, or we wait 4 more generations to talk about it.
So that's all the questions we have. If anybody in the audience has a question you want to direct individually or to the entire panel, they'll get 90 seconds to answer. And if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll go from there. And I'll try to repeat the questions for everybody.
So Chris and Taryn, my challenge to you would be to recognize that good policy comes from moderation and incremental changes. Dropping 40% of excise tax, a loss of $84 million to municipalities, is rather drastic. We all recognize in the private sector, which I champion, it's more and more difficult in this region, but I still champion the private sector, that we need basic infrastructure. It's kind of a false choice to say individuals you could save on your excise taxes, but you can forget about roads. Small businesses in a rural region of the state need roads. So I guess I'd ask Chris and Karen, what's the alternative? For Peggy and Jeff, my question would be, some good people with good minds out there are thinking, why did the legislature in 1929 create the disconnect between excise taxes and actual requirement that you spend on local roads? Jeff, your materials are informative that you'd spend, as a practical matter, this money on local roads. But there is no legal requirement that you actually do that, and some municipalities don't. The responsible ones do, but some don't. So I think there's challenges for both sides of this debate. I'm glad the debate's coming forward, but I've got to say to the proponents of this kind of drastic cut in excise taxes, what's your alternative? Are you saying to small businesses, you're not going to have maintenance of rural roads? What's going to happen?
We'll start, Chris, you have it. Well, what is the alternative?
Again, I'm not an elected official, but I'd just like to briefly tell you a little story about the city of Waterville. The Waterville City Council over the past few years has committed themselves to controlling city spending. And in doing so, they were able to reduce property taxes. Now, some of the opponents may think that this is a red flag and that tremendous services were cut and the sky was falling and the roads were crumbling beneath our feet, but in fact the exact opposite was true. Waterville managed to maintain and repair all of their city roads as well as some state roads that the state had not yet repaired. They were able to build new public works infrastructure and salt sheds. They were able to also increase their reserve fund from $1 million to $10 million. A commitment to controlling spending and to taking a long, hard look at how that city was running government allowed them to make these dramatic improvements to the city that lowered the tax burden for their residents. Again, I'm not an elected official, but I also think that good policy benefits the people of Maine, and the people of Maine right now are paying too much in excise taxes. Question 2, vote yes, pay less, is a chance to enact some good policy to make sure that the people of Maine realize the local tax relief that has been promised by many of the opponents of this campaign, local property tax relief that has been promised but not delivered. This is our opportunity to create that tax relief, to put money back in our pockets.
Jeff, you want to take the other side of the question?
Well, I'll take the question that was propounded with regard to the legal requirements to use this money for the roads. There's a historical reason for that. The answer's in the materials that we have here. There's a constitutional provision that effectively prohibits the legislature from making that a required dedicated use. And the reason for that is when this law was created in 1929, it was a property tax, a general fund property tax on cars. And that's the way it's still done in Connecticut today. Your car is like your house and its value goes under the property tax. So it went into the general fund. At that time, some primordial Maine Municipal Association must have gotten a constitutional amendment to say that the legislature really can't require that money to be dedicated because it was general fund revenue before that. So there's a legal reason on a statewide level why this money isn't dedicated for road use. Almost all town meeting municipalities, in any event, legally dedicate it locally through their town meeting warrant. And so there's a legal dedication of these funds for roads on the local level in most communities in Maine.
We've got about 5 minutes left here. If there's another question, we probably can get through that one as well. Go ahead.
I really had more of a comment than anything. I think grouping all towns and cities together in this is the wrong thing to do. I know in the city of Brewer that we've complied with, like, should I say, with LD1. We've lowered property taxes. We've done everything that we can possibly do within our budgets, and we've maintained services. We've not added new employees. We've done all of the things, but where's the state? And all they keep doing is passing on unfunded mandates to us. So instead of looking at the little towns and cities that are trying to keep up with all the unfunded mandates, I think you need to be going after the state and make them leave us alone and let us maintain what we're doing and doing it right. Because we are there for all of the citizens to see. Not all of the citizens see what the state's doing. So take a look at them and not us.
Comments from the panel?
Well, I certainly understand what you're saying, and we're also focused on reining in state spending and having more reasonable increases in state spending. That's why question 4 is also on the ballot. But this is a statewide rate, set not at the local level, but set in state statute. And the only opportunity to change it is to change that state statute that impacts all towns directly and also impacts all Maine families directly. And so that's the process to change this rate. The legislature either has to do it or it has to be done through citizens' initiative. There's not an opportunity for local towns to decide what kind of rate. If the local towns wanted to set up an opportunity where they could change the rate, they could change the law to say up to so many mills, and then they could set the rate locally.
I'm not sure I have anything to say on that. I agree with you here.
We're pretty well out of time. How about, and this wasn't in the plan, but I'm going to ad lib anyway. How about we give each one of them kind of just a 30, 60 seconds to kind of finish up your last kind of statements, and then we'll let everybody get started on their day. We'll have Jeff start. Just kind of a wrap up of your opinions, your thoughts.
At this juncture, we thank you very much for providing this opportunity. I think that's the way that this thing works. It's a nice forum. It's probably the best well-attended forum that I've been to on this subject. I'm finding as I go out on the road that there's a little bit of a blasé attitude I'm experiencing with regard to the November 3rd election. It seems like there are 7 questions out there, a lot on the ballot, something for everybody, young and old, so you'd think there'd be some excitement, but I'm not catching it yet. Maybe it's still early in the campaign season. On slide 16 of our PowerPoint, you see the municipal objections to this proposal. They've been well articulated here in this debate. I think they've come to the top. This is local money. It's used for local roads. As a matter of fact, what happens, it's a big, steep reduction in that revenue. There are going to be serious impacts. The impacts really are either public works reductions and or property tax increases. That's not a good thing from our perspective. It would not be helpful to Maine's people. It would probably result in an increase of the real estate property tax, which is something that is disadvantageous to everybody.
I thank you as well. This has been a great opportunity for us to get our message out there, our message of vote yes, pay less. And I would just ask you to leave with a few thoughts on your mind here. Do not be fooled by the doom and gloom arguments of the opponents. Remember, 1 out of every $7 we earn is taken away from us in taxes by state and local government. Question number 2 is a chance to alleviate that burden. Putting more money back in our pockets saves the average Maine family $800 over the first 5 years of ownership. Putting more money back in our pockets, putting people back to work in dealerships across the state. We have an opportunity on November 3rd to make real and positive change for the families of Maine to help them better face their financial futures. Vote yes, pay less, and thank you very much.
I'm going to stand up, maybe I project better. I want to thank you too for having the municipal side of this. Very complex, very detailed in terms of what we're trying to do, but the city government across the state, city and town governments, have been trying to do more with less for a long time, and we continue to do that. Are we going to make the citizens suffer if this gets voted in? No. We're going to try to make it work for them. We're going to try to make them happy with the service levels that they have. But undoubtedly, cause and effect has got to be taken into consideration because it's not going to be an easy fix.
Thank you again for the opportunity. It's great to be back in the Twin Cities. I just want to remind you, Maine has the 7th highest auto excise tax in the country. 22 states have no auto excise tax, and they still maintain their roads. This is an opportunity to lower the tax rate. It's the only tax solely paid by Maine families. Question 2 gives you that opportunity to vote yes, as Chris said, to pay less, and to finally make it more affordable for a Maine family to get into a newer, safer, cleaner car. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's going to wrap up the debate here for this morning for the early bird breakfast, Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for joining us for this program presented by the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce.
Bye.